Welcome to the Interop. This is a podcast about understanding the decentralized economic networks which make up the Interchain. And my hope is that my listeners will gain a better understanding of the topology of these networks, the technologies that make it possible, and the opportunities that it provides to investors and developers. I'm Sebastian Couture. I'm a podcaster and investor. And I'm here today with Federico Kunze Küllmer, who's the co-founder of Evmos and the CEO of Tharsis. Thanks for joining me, Fede.
Hey, Sebastian. Thanks for having me today. Really excited to be part of the Interop and also this new venture that you're starting.
This is a new podcast. It's called the Interop. This episode is going to go out on Epicenter, which is my other podcast, but also go out on the Interop. So it's a bit of a cross promotion here to get people in the Epicenter universe to also start listening to the Interop, because there's so much happening in the Interchain ecosystem right now, and I think there's a lot of interest for it, and we've seen that with all of this new content coming out. And what I want to do with this podcast is bring more technical discussions. So the kinds of conversations that we have on Epicenter, the very deep technical discussions, but that also go kind of high level and looking at the ecosystem, at like a 10,000 feet level. I want to have those conversations about the Interchain and the Cosmos ecosystem. But yeah, for listeners who aren't familiar with you, I mean, you've been in the Tendermint and Cosmos kind of ecosystem for a really long time. You were like an early employee at Tendermint. Tell us a bit about how your background. I think also Sunny is the person who kind of got you hired at Tendermint or introduced you to the Tendermint organization back in the day. Give us a bit of a background here on how you came into this world.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I was one of the, I would say first employees at Tendermint. But more importantly, I was also one of the first interns from Tendermint. So I was part of blockchain in Berkeley as part of my semester abroad that I did at UC Berkeley. And while being at blockchain in Berkeley, Sunny had just dropped out during that semester, and he started working at Cosmos, Tendermint. And Sunny saw my work that I was doing with the Blockchain Berkeley organization, working with different Fortune 500 companies, developing smart contracts, etc. And he introduced me to the Tendermint team that was working super hard back then. It was post ICO, so they were working super hard on developing all the functionalities of Cosmos. Back in the day, they started working on the Cosmos SDK. They had Peggy, and they also had, of course, Ethermint, which is their precursor project of Evmos. And they saw my work, and I applied for an internship and I started working with them. And then once I graduated, I moved to a full-time position and relocated to Berlin.
Yeah, because you were initially working from the San Francisco office, I think, and then you moved to the Berlin office where you're now based. What was it like in the early days of working at Tendermint? What was the vibe there?
Dude, it was super rushed. There were so many projects going on. There was Peggy, which was a former name of Gravity Bridge as well. Ethermint, Tendermint Core, Cosmos SDK, and Gaia, which initially was only part of the Cosmos SDK, but then it was moved to another code base so that you can have separation of concerns, and the Cosmos Hub could evolve into its own particular code base with different functionalities, etc. Like the ones we now see with Gravity, DEX, etc. So lots of projects, teams working on all these different initiatives, interns working on everything back in the day. When I joined full time, I was working on the Voyager wallet. I'm not sure if you remember that. With Jordan and Fabo, they were the first ones to introduce UI for Cosmos with the governance. We implemented also the Ledger UI to connect directly with the Ledger Cosmos applications that had just launched. And yeah, it was exciting times back in the days.
And when did you start working on putting an EVM on Tendermint? I think you were part of the first kind of team within the Tendermint organization to start working on that project.
So I didn't work exactly on Ethermint back in the days. I was mostly working on either Voyager, Peggy, so Gravity Bridge, and I also worked on the Cosmos SDK. But initially Ethermint, which was this first iteration of EVM on top of the Tendermint consensus, Tendermint core consensus engine. It was developed first as an Tendermint application, which is the base layer that the Cosmos SDK now implements, and then it migrated fully to like a Cosmos application, so a Cosmos-based chain, and that took a while and was spearheaded by Jack Sampoling, who coincidentally was hired to PM the Ethermint project, and then once more resources were required for the Cosmos Hub, he switched teams and started working on that project. We were also working with Alex Bez. Bez was the core contributor for a long time and also started working on Ethermint, and then migrated entirely to the Cosmos SDK and the rest of the Tendermint core. And basically he's been working on the full stack of Cosmos applications for a while. So yeah, I worked, but so back to your original question, when did I start working? It was in 2020 when I was contracting for ChainSafe. So after I left Tendermint, I started freelancing and working for different entities, and one of them was ChainSafe, and I started working on Ethermint because they had received a grant from the ICF to work on Ethermint.
So I want to get straight into Evmos here, and I heard you say on a community call, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that what you're doing is difficult, and I think it's difficult enough to build to build applications on blockchains. There's all sorts of things that need to be taken into account that perhaps are abstracted away in web development or like more mature development environments. There's just the fact that it's decentralized. You have to take all these stakeholders into account. There's the fact that like you have to keep the chain secure with like validators or miners, but you guys are adding like an extra complexity onto this, which is like marrying these two technologies that weren't made to work together initially, I think. And I'm coming at this with like not a very technical eye, but like it seems to me that these technologies are not well suited to go together. Can you break down like why building an EVM on Tendermint consensus and then like integrating IBC into that technology stack is so complex?
So the main problem that we see in integrating not only to Tendermint specifically, but to the rest of the Cosmos ecosystem, is the lack of support for Ethereum tools, Ethereum keys. So, for example, one very particular case that has been super hard for us to like go through, and we had to make like really tough decisions in terms of like how can we improve user experience, was the lack of support for Ethereum keys on the Cosmos ecosystem. Because Cosmos only supports one type of key, that is the one that it's shared across the Cosmos Hub, etc. So like when you create your address, it's always in that key format, which is the SACP 256K1. Coincidentally, Ethereum also implements that key, but has a different derivation for the private key to the address. So the address generated with the same key is different. that results in, just imagine you going to Kepler wallet and opening your tab, and then if you export that private key and then you import it to, say, MetaMask, you have a completely different key, like a different address, so to say. That's one case. And then the other thing, just like misc things, like for example, the address format on Ethereum is hex addresses like 0x blah blah blah, and then Cosmos you have like bec32, so you need to create compatibility for the user to, in order to, okay, I'm now using a Cosmos address, I should expect to use the bec32 format, so like the ones that start with Cosmos or Evmos in our case, or osmosis. So you have like all these formats that are different. That's more like on the UX kind of thing. And then on top of that, you have the problem that in Tendermint consensus, it's BFT, so fast finality. So there's no concept of pending state. So when you have to wait for the transactions to finalize, sometimes on Ethereum you have like transaction pending on the on Etherscan, like all this functionality that on Tendermint is not there, because there's never, I don't know, there's never been a use case that needs to support handling pending state, because like the state is committed to the chain.
Yeah, it's not probabilistic like in Ethereum or proof of work blockchains.
So it goes through the mempool, the transaction is verified internally and then broadcasted to the rest of the network, and then the transaction is finalized. But on Ethereum, you actually need to have a probabilistic finality, so like a Nakamoto consensus, where the there needs to be like confirmations for the transactions in order to be included to the heaviest subtree as well.
I'm not exactly sure how Polygon works under the hood, but my understanding is that Polygon is an EVM chain on Tendermint, right? What's different about Polygon and Evmos aside from the fact that maybe there's IBC on Evmos?
So the main difference is the architecture. Polygon was created in a way to entirely support the Ethereum ecosystem and to create checkpoints to the Ethereum blockchain. So you can, even though you have fast finality on the Tendermint consensus, you can eventually roll back to the previous blocks if needed be. So the approach here is different, and then I think they're working on a Cosmos SDK, but they're still implementing checkpointing. The staking approach is different, so it's not very modular. And I think they're working on like an SDK as well, a Polygon SDK, so that they can have more chains that are EVM compatible in their ecosystem. But the modular approach that they have is very different from the ones that we can find right nowadays on Cosmos, because they don't need to run into this issue of like, oh, compatibility between Cosmos and Ethereum, and they took the approach of like creating or drafting the entire architecture based on Ethereum, so they don't have to handle any of the Cosmos cases.
Okay, yeah, understood. And when Ethereum starts moving, when the EVM, I mean, like basically Ethereum 2 is going to be fast finality proof of stake. Are there aspects of like the ETH2 EVM or whatever that should look like that make it easier for Evmos to implement, where you don't have to take into account this technical debt that has to do with proof of work?
So most of the components from proof of work we actually are not relevant to us. So for example, on the JSON RPC, the miner namespace, or setting the Coinbase address for the miner, like all that stuff. So like the validator itself is the one that is like using all this functionality itself, and it's all handled through the Cosmos component of Evmos, which are the Cosmos SDK modules. Whereas on Ethereum, it's all handled through like the internal Geth architecture, or like in this case, the ETH2 architecture. So like one big thing is like, even though Ethereum might evolve to ETH 2.0, we still need to ensure that compatibility with some of the existing tooling. And so there are two approaches here. Either you reduce compatibility with, say, MetaMasks or other EVM explorers, clients, etc. tools, or by, for example, just implementing the EVM and you define your own, say, JSON RPC endpoints and whatever, and which will cause all these clients to break. Or you need to all the time try to catch up with the latest developments or the latest versions supported of mainnet on Ethereum. So there's a double effort in terms of like supporting all the Cosmos ecosystem tooling, supporting all the Ethereum ecosystem tooling, and trying to catch up with whatever the latest state of Ethereum is, and implement new functionalities on top of that. So our team, which is fairly small, is able to quickly adapt and catch up with Ethereum and implement all this new functionality for the EVM, for the Evmos EVM, and also implement new functionality in terms of like token economics, interoperability, etc. So we're looking to hire more core engineers and also full stack engineers that can help us like merge and marry these two ecosystem into a single user experience that is really smooth for the end user.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. Like, so there's lots of things here I think that need to be unpacked. So, the user experience, the ecosystem of applications, the types of features, and you talked about tokenomics, and Evmos had a novel approach to launching the chain, which was the Rektdrop. It's been covered extensively, and I don't want to go like too much into details here, but just for I think most of our listeners will be familiar with the fact that there was an attempt to launch Evmos a couple of weeks ago. That attempt, well, for lack of a better term, it failed. And we'll get into what happened later in the interview. But what is the current state of affairs, and how how does this affect effectively either the enthusiasm around the network launching, and have you seen any evidence that what was like a highly, I think, hyped project with a lot of enthusiasm, have you seen any evidence that is going away, or is the community, or is the community like confident and sort of supporting you in your efforts to relaunch the chain?
The upgrade, as you mentioned, didn't go as smooth as we wanted to. There were like different bugs, especially because of the lack of support from different like Cosmos tools, and there were also like some edge cases that we had to handle in terms of IBC, because now besides having like all the functionality on Cosmos, the functionality on the EVM, we also need to handle all these edge cases for IVC. And yeah, definitely, I think the hype has lowered a little bit. I am confident that once we launch again and we restart the chain, the hype will continue, but mostly because users will be able to claim their tokens through the dashboard, super easy, and will be able to like stake their tokens natively. And there are also a lot of projects already trying to build and deploy in Evmos, and also like a few of them are creating a few airdrops so that the community can also like benefit early on. And I think the earlier the users start to stake and use their tokens for LPing, etc., the quicker the hype will return. I think it has also been really humbling for us, for the team, so then we're not here for the hype, but we're also like trying to build as much as possible and try to, I don't know, improve our processes, improve the functionality that we want to bring, and ensure that we implement the changes. And this is one key difference with other EVM ecosystems, I believe, is that we are not only tackling this from a like core protocol perspective, like the infrastructure that supports the smart contracts, but we're also trying to push for products that support the protocol. So like the dashboard, we've been closely working with Kepler in order to support Ethereum signing. We are adding, for example, MetaMask support for Cosmos transactions, so that users can use their MetaMask wallet with Cosmos and Ethereum. So, like, trying to create this user experience natively, and we need to ensure that this is not only supported on the in the protocol side, but it's also supported on the product side. And I think the protocol itself was ready. I think what was missing was more QA in terms of like the tooling and the product itself.
And how are you doing through all this? How are you holding up through this ordeal?
Yeah, it was hard during the first week, I think, but our team is also very supportive and the community is very supportive. Um, I think a lot of people were like super hyped and also the price of the token and whatnot, but for the ones that know us, and we've been working and building for so long, and we were the only team that was able to finally launch this after more than 6 years already. So yeah, we went back and building to build and be able to support these new functionalities that we wanted to add, and go back to the drawing board and test every functionality that we wanted. So I've been able to hold up with the support of friends, family, and also the community that is supporting us. But I think once we restart the chain, it's going to be like the best user experience you will see.
Yeah, I'm really. We'll talk about like the launch plan and everything towards the end here, but yeah, let's dive into some of the things that Evmos brings in terms of innovation to the EVM, like currently or like when the chain launches, but then also into the future and the roadmap for the chain. Um, yeah, can you break all that down for us?
Yeah, so we now have a bunch of projects that are looking to deploy to Evmos in the first week or two after restarting, including Aave and other blue chip projects. And we have a lot of new projects that are deploying into the Evmos ecosystem because they saw the potential of like the new token, the innovative token model that we created. So there are multiple branches in terms of like the feature roadmap that we want to implement. One of them is, of course, called protocol. Like, what is the chain going to support in the future, besides just AVM and the default interoperability that Cosmos allows you. And then the other side is like, what are we doing in terms of products in order to support all these use cases? And in terms of the protocol, we've been also like working closely with Celestia for Evmos, and this is something that we're really looking forward to implement and eventually deploy once Celestia is ready, which is a settlement layer for Celestia rollups. So it's basically a rollup on like supporting EVM rollups on top of Evmos EVM, and that's one thing. The other thing is working on interoperability, and interoperability not only in the sense of transferring assets. We are already supporting ERC20 tokens to be transferred in and out from the Evmos chain. But we're also looking forward to enable interchain composability, so that chains like Sommelier or Region Network who have specific use cases targeting DeFi can directly call smart contracts deployed in Evmos and make sense of that data by unpacking the events, and then realizing, okay, like here's the event data that was logged on the Evmos smart contract. What am I going to do with that? And then like they handle like specific use cases, like for example on Sommelier they can rebalance LP positions or work directly with Aave. So this brings a lot of benefits in terms of reduces latency. If you're using Gravity Bridge or any other bridge any existing bridge currently deployed in the ecosystem, because IVC will drastically decrease the latency, and then the transaction fees will be way lower. So I expect a lot of interest in this functionality from other teams in order to support communication directly with smart contracts. And that's one thing. The other in particular is NFT interoperability. We're also working closely with the Stargaze team in order to transfer NFTs from the Evmos AVM into the Cosmos WASM environment that they use. And so like making interoperable NFTs is going to be something huge for the rest of the ecosystem and for GameFi in particular, so that we can support application-specific blockchains or application-specific EVMs that are directly sharing security with Evmos, for example, and be able to directly use this functionality to transfer NFT assets. And yeah, like that's more or less what we're doing. And in the future, we're also going to be supporting cross-chain NFT, like delegate calls from one chain to another, and then yeah, once we implement that, we'll be able to share composability between EVM chains, so that a chain that is on a smart contract that is deployed on Evmos can communicate directly with a smart contract that is deployed, for example, on Kronos or other EVM chain that will be deployed in the future.
So I really want to dive into this interoperability aspect, because I think there's different components of it that maybe, or at least I don't fully understand. So if you're used to using sort of interchain or IBC assets, you can move assets from one chain to the other. So if you have assets on you have like atoms, you can move those atoms over to osmosis, for instance, and then those atoms live there, and then you can move them back to another. So from the user perspective, it's seamless, and I think like people kind of understand that once they've used it. What's that going to look like for Evmos? The way I'm thinking about it is like, okay, so you'll be able to move assets outside of Evmos, but these are not IBC assets. They're like ERC20 tokens or kind of EVM tokens. And then what's the interaction with other EVMs? So Ethereum or Polygon, or what? How does Evmos create interoperability also with those chains?
So the Evmos interoperability components are, yeah, they're multiple, and the main one, of course, is IVC in the Cosmos ecosystem. So IVC allows us, as you mentioned, to transfer native assets from the Cosmos Hub, from Osmosis, directly into the Evmos. But unfortunately, the native functionality of IVC doesn't allow conversions of those tokens directly to the Evmos AVM. So you need to create sort of like a mapping between like ERC20 tokens and Cosmos IVC tokens. So for example, like a Cosmos hub atom or an Osmosis token that has been transferred over via IVC. How do you represent now those tokens within the EVM, and how then those tokens are bridged over, which is the second component I want to talk about. How are those tokens now bridged over through their ERC20 representation to other chains? and that's going to be through Nomad and Connects and other bridges that are deploying on Evmos. So we're going to see an influx of all these ERC20 tokens from all these different chains, Polygon, Avalanche, and Ethereum, of course, Moonriver and Moonbeam, to the Evmos and Cosmos ecosystem. And then those tokens, those ERC20 tokens, will be able to be converted to the Cosmos IBC representation so that they can be transferred over to Cosmos Hub or Osmosis. So it's going to create a lot of liquidity. So we expect Evmos to become the main point of entry from all the EVM ecosystem, for all these assets to come through these bridges to Evmos. And then through this functionality that we're allowing these ERC20 tokens to be converted, those tokens will now be able to be transferred via IVC to the rest of the Cosmos ecosystem.
Okay, so let's just take an example here. Let's say I have USDC on Ethereum, or even Polygon, or like any EVM chain that supports USDC. I'll have to move those through a bridge, which will either, right now you talked about Nomad and Connects. So those are two separate bridges that will be Evmos compatible. Move those assets into Evmos, and then from there you can take those USDC assets. There's some sort of conversion that happens that allows you to move them into the native Interchain assets that we're all used to moving around.
It's like changing the address format, more or less. You're changing the format for how the token is represented on chain. Either it's like an ERC20 token format or it's a Cosmos token format.
Okay, and will those be fungible? Like, say you move them from Connects or you move them from Nomad, are those going to be fungible once they're in Evmos?
Yeah. So there's a direct mapping. So governance approve token pair. So that the token pair is just a mapping between the Cosmos and the ERC20 asset. So that there's only one canonical representation for, say, WETH on Ethereum, for USDC. So that there's like only one token. So that this ensures fungibility, and then this token will be able to be transferred via IBC to other chains.
Okay, and is fungibility also ensured? So they're insured via these two bridges, but is it insured, like, is a Polygon USDC or a Polygon wrapped ETH equivalent and fungible to a Ethereum wrapped ETH once it arrives in Evmos, or are those still kind of separate tokens?
So the fungibility needs to be, the fungibility between like all these bridges is something that we're currently working with multiple teams. Frax is already working, is also deploying on Evmos, and so yeah, like as you mentioned, there are going to be like multiple bridges. It's the same as the problem with IVC and fungibility. When you relay the same token via different sort of like IVC routes, the tokens are not fungible because there are different security guarantees in all these different chains that the token has passed through. So that someone needs to basically assume the risk, and having, well, I wouldn't say like a canonical bridge because it's not maintained by the team, but there's like a preferred way of routing all these different chains. It has different options on security levels. Also helps in terms of fungibility. I would expect different also like DeFi protocols, state like Curve or I think it's Kinesis, the name of the project, that is also going to do like stable swap, stable coin AMM. So yeah, to handle all of these fungibility issue.
Yeah, I was talking to the Kinesis guys the other day, and it seems like they want to address this fungibility issue, which exists like it's independent of Evmos, right? This exists already in the Ethereum ecosystem, and there was some debate, around. I think it was a couple months ago where like about which bridges should be allowed on osmosis, and like Sunny weighed in with like his opinion, which was we need to limit, or like at least for now, we can't create an experience where there's all these representations of the same assets, which creates like a user experience that's degraded for end users. Like we've seen on Ethereum, right, where you have like 20 different representations of USD assets, for example, like on the same liquidity pool, or like on the same, like on Uniswap, for instance. So why are there two bridges? Why Nomad and Connects, and why not like a canonical bridge?
So Nomad and Connects are able to provide. It's sort of like the same bridge underlying bridge. It's Connects is using like Nomad infrastructure, but there are different options for in terms of speed of the transfer, in terms of like because it's an optimistic bridge, and there are different like pros and cons of using like an optimistic bridge in terms of latency, or like how like if the transaction is optimistic, and then you have this a period that you can challenge basically the transfer. So they're more or less two sides of the same coin, in terms of like using the same infrastructure by offering different like options to the user.
Okay, and will what about the sort of interchain accounts and the ability for like an address on Cosmos or on Osmosis to control addresses and smart contracts on Evmos? What is that going to be possible, and what kinds of things does that allow?
Yeah, so interchain accounts is a functionality that we're really interesting to work on. We wanted to implement it for mainnet, but unfortunately the IVC release wasn't ready. So one of the cool things that we want to support is, for example, like you have all these funds, all these validators that have tons of atoms, tons of osmosis and other tokens. But how do you manage the tokens safely in an organization right now on Cosmos? You need to create a multisig, like a 2 out of 3, and there's no UI for it. If you've used Cosmos multisig, you know the pains that I'm explaining to you right now, because it's really hard. We've been core contributors and core engineers of the Cosmos ecosystem for a while now, and even us, we have an internal guide of how to make a transfer with the Cosmos multisig, which only is supported on the terminal CLI.
Yeah, this is a huge pain point, I think, in Cosmos,
It's a
and
huge pain point,
yeah.
and one of the big things that we want to support is for accounts on the Cosmos Hub on Osmosis to be able to manage and assets on for example, on a Gnosis multisig. So you can have the same assets, and you can just use a Gnosis multisig for everything, and manage your Cosmos coins, your Osmosis, your Evmos ERC20s, and yeah, like Evmos tokens as well. So it's gonna be like improving the user experience is something that we really care about, and using all these interoperability functionalities to also benefit the rest of the Cosmos ecosystem, I think it's going to be like a key component here.
Yeah, I mean that being able to use a product like Gnosis Multisig on Cosmos would be just like amazing. I think they've really nailed the multisig UX and feature set, and I mean I'm also kind of surprised that no one's built this already on Cosmos. Maybe it'll come. I mean, like you got the guys working on DAO, and there's like some multi-sig there, but it's kind of clunky still, and the UX isn't great, and you can't add addresses, and the potential is there, but it's not a production product. Yeah, I think you can in the contracts, but like the contracts support those calls, but you still have to do like a command line um, thing to get that to work. Yeah. So what'll be the DeFi component? Like what kind of DeFi applications will be launched on Evmos? You mentioned Aave earlier, but are there native projects that are anticipated to launch there? And I think like broadly, what will be the DeFi experience on Evmos, and how will it be different from what we're used to in Ethereum, and maybe how is it different from Osmosis? What does it bring to the table?
For the team, it's more or less the same, but now it enables them to. So for all of these chains to access the token directly via IVC, and for the token to be transferred via IVC, which also provides more liquidity to the project. Additionally, you have the token model that allows users for all these protocols to spend 50% of the transaction fee, and those 50% transaction fee goes to the validators, and 50% of the transaction fee goes to the developer team, so the contract owners. And so like that is able to fund additional sources, and provide additional funding for the team. That's more like why is it better? It has lower transaction fees. It has additional liquidity sources. So from all these EVM chains and also from the Cosmos ecosystem, and with the new interchain composability component, as I mentioned before, other chains will be directly able to interact with these smart contracts via IVC. And also the smart contracts on Evmos will be able to call the other smart contracts that are supported on the EVM, on the Evmos EVM, on other chains, for example. So you don't need to fragment composability at all.
Okay, got it. So that's one thing I remember hearing about, but I forgot, is that transaction fees can go in a DeFi application on Evmos. Transaction fees can go to the liquidity provider, but they can also go to, or sorry, not transaction fees, but the swap fees can also go to the validator.
Yeah. So the key thing here is normally on Ethereum, and this is also a key difference with the rest of the EVM ecosystem, is on Ethereum and other EVM ecosystems, if you're paying the transaction fee, that transaction fee is going directly to the block proposer, either the miner or the validator. Here, instead, the main difference is that 50% goes to the developer, and then 50% goes to the block proposer.
To the developer, right? To the developer of the contract. Yeah.
Yes. What this creates effectively is a decentralized marketplace, a decentralized app store, where the users that are interacting with a DeFi application are paying 50% of the transaction fee to the developer and 50% of the transaction fee to the block proposer. And it's not that they are paying an extra 50%, it's just that the fee that they're already paying, same as Ethereum or other EVM chains, is now being split between the two organizations, or the developer and the block proposer. What this ensures alignment with their protocol itself, so that the validators still get the rewards that they are generated through the validation of the protocol and proof of stake. Plus, they give 50% of the transaction fees. But now you're also incentivizing all these developers to come deploy their applications to Evmos, and this creates a larger. It's like chicken and egg problem. Like how do you bring in more users if there are no applications? And through this, you're also incentivizing new developers to come in and deploy through this what we call dApp store model.
So this is a really novel, I think, functionality in blockchains generally. I don't think that there's any other chain that does this, where the smart contract developer is also remunerated for transaction fees. Um, do you think this is something that other chains will adopt? Like, is this something that you could see kind of spreading in the EVM ecosystem as well?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of. I mean, so if you think about the way of funding a team right now, the teams either raise funding for the company, like traditional sources of funding, go to VC, go to like early angel investors, and they provide like, yeah, they dilute themselves in order to attract new investors. And then you also have like the token model where they launch a new token and they distribute that, and the team holds a large the percentage of the token. Um, but if you think about it, there hasn't been like a long sustainable um, funding mechanism that is directly correlated with the usage of the application. So the more users interact with the application here on Evmos, the more transaction fees the developer will get. So it's a long sustainable, and it's in parallel to these two other funding models that I mentioned before, but it's a more like it's a healthier one in the long term, because it allows you generate uh, continuous revenue to the developer team.
Yeah, it like totally changes the economics, I think, for the developer team. And when a developer launches a contract, are these parameters that you can set? Say, okay, I want to take like 50%, or I can take less, or like if I don't want to have any other transaction, like different contracts might have different ideas about how these fees should be repetitioned between the miners or the validators and the contracts or the teams. Is this like by default, or is it something that you can set up?
Yeah, so it's set by default, or like this is something that we need to still analyze with the core team. But for now, the current specification that we have, it's set in by default. But what you can do as a developer is, if you don't want to actually earn these rewards, you can set the address that you want to, instead of you, the developer team, receiving 50% of the transaction fees, you could redirect those tokens to the community pool if you want, or to the validators themselves. So you can get the validator address and then reward the validator, or if you want to allocate those tokens to like the entire pool of validators, you can also distribute them to the entire pool of validators. So there are different options here, and you can even like set another contract developer address, or fund another contract through these
Yeah,
mechanisms.
or you could fund some charity or something like that.
Exactly. And that's totally up to the developer, and they can change the address whenever they want.
Does that? I mean, do you think that? So let's say we have developer, because then it seems like you get in this situation where developers are competing also for their transactions to get processed. So like if a developer is awarding more of the transaction fees to the validators, so awarding less transaction fees for themselves, then there may be an incentive for those transactions to go through first. Is that something that is taken into account here, or does that not really come into play?
At the moment, the Tendermint mempool only supports first in first out queue. So you send a transaction with, say, 100 tokens in fees, and then you send a transaction with 1,000 tokens in fees. The that was processed before is actually executed before, unless you run some like fork of Tendermint where you modify the mempool internals completely. It's not currently supported, but I think the next major Tendermint version is supporting like prioritized queue, and we'll definitely need to take that into account. But the current model doesn't support it straight ahead. But yeah, this is something. Well, depending when this functionality is released, we'll need to take into account. So if we deploy this functionality first, we don't need to account for this particular case. But once we want to upgrade to the latest Tendermint version, we'll have to consider this for sure.
Okay, yeah. And what other kinds of innovative things is Evmos are integrated in Evmos that don't exist in other EVM chains, or what other innovative things that are you implementing in the token model?
So the other innovative thing that we took from existing DeFi applications is the concept of usage rewards. So if you read the Rektdrop token model, you can see that we airdrop tokens to users on Ethereum based on the gas that they've spent, which is called the gas drop model. And the more you spend on gas on different contracts, the more tokens you get in airdrop. And so we wanted to implement this on the protocol level for users that interact natively with different contracts. So what we're doing is taking the LP incentive model that Osmosis has, so like incentivizing the liquidity pools. We're implementing this, but for smart contracts. So the more gas you spend on smart contracts, the more usage rewards you will get. So you're incentivizing certain contracts. So for example, bridging could be incentivized, or AMM swaps could be, or like, I don't know, like an NFT marketplace could be incentivized. And this is all voted through governance. So the community votes for which are going to be the contracts that are going to be incentivized. Yeah, you define a number of weeks that you want these incentives to run, and then you're basically incentivizing on all the users that interact with this contract. So it's going to be like a growth hack mechanism, because now if you have this contract that is incentivized and also the developers are getting transaction fees, the users are getting tokens just for using the application, but they're paying with the transaction fees, right? And then half of those transaction fees will go directly to the developer team, which will attract more developers, more contracts get incentivized, and more users interact with the protocol itself. So it's creating a positive reinforcement cycle in which you are attracting more developers and more users over time.
So, are you confident that Evmos will also act as a growth hacking mechanism for the Interchain IBC ecosystem? Because, as a developer, it makes sense to go deploy your contract there. There's going to be a number of blue chip Ethereum dApps that are going to deploy there, like Aave is one of them. The liquidity, it'll be pretty seamless to move liquidity in and out of Evmos.
Yeah, Kepler is supported natively with Ethereum signing. MetaMask is supported natively with traditional Ethereum signing, plus Cosmos signing transactions through EIP 712, which is a meta transaction standard. So now with MetaMask, you can sign IBC. So you don't need to add any new functionality to the existing project or to your existing client. You just need to support EIP 712 if you are using like a UI, for example. Yeah, I think it's going to be huge for the ecosystem, because attracting new developers and new projects in general and new users that are native from the Ethereum ecosystem is also going to attract more tokens, more use cases for the Interchain ecosystem. Yeah, I was part of the core IVC team, and we're close with other teams in the ecosystem. So all this functionality that is going to be deployed on Evmos is going to be available to the entire Cosmos ecosystem through IVC. And this is something that we're not gonna try to, for example, like capture all this value only for the Evmos chain, but we want all this liquidity to come into the Cosmos ecosystem, all these different use cases to come into the Cosmos ecosystem, all this new functionality from the Ethereum tool use from this Ethereum tooling that already works and is already supported by multiple teams is going to be available for like the one that I explained with the multisig is going to be available for the rest of the Cosmos ecosystem through interchain accounts, for example.
Yeah, and all of the DAO tooling and all, I mean, all of the, yeah, I mean, it's just like Solidity and the EVM have such an advance, I think, on like any other blockchain in terms of tooling. Um, yeah, I think this makes so much sense.
And something I tweeted about just before the call and that we're really excited to work on is creating like a product for new projects to make it super easy to deploy contracts to Evmos, but also airdropping new tokens to Evmos stakers, to gas guzzler contracts. So the same that we implemented for the gas drop and the Rektdrop will be available for users to just like select those parameters, filter the like select some filters like leave out some centralized exchanges, select a few validators they want, set up minimum amount, set up a minimum amount of gas they want, select IVC transactions, governance participation, and then you get a CSV file or like a spreadsheet with all the information of all the addresses that is publicly verified, because you will also get the amount of the list of queries that you can also run manually in order to verify this, and then you'll be able to airdrop the tokens directly to those addresses by using it directly on the EVM.
Okay, this is huge. So, I mean, you're essentially you've got to build all of this data scraping infrastructure to do this, right? I mean, this is a centralized tool that you're describing. It's not an on-chain tool.
Yeah, it's essentially it's basically the mechanism that we implemented already for the Rektdrop, but turning it into a product not only for ourselves, because we already implemented the Rektdrop mechanism and we also already selected the contracts, the users from that had staked on Osmosis and Cosmos Hub, etc. But we're also supporting this mechanism for new projects that want to deploy to Evmos to be able to use this tool without any like without just spending months and months into like selecting the contracts and stuff. You just need to select the contract address. You just need to select like, oh, what's the minimum amount of gas that I want, and then you can run these query, big query, of course, and then you get all these addresses and you get the amount of tokens that you want, because you're also be inputting you also provide as an input the amount of tokens that you want, and then you just get the addresses.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, that's a product that you could probably charge for like as a separate even like a separate product. So I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the interchain smart contract landscape, if you will. There is like CosmWasm has a decent sized foothold, I think, in the Cosmos ecosystem, with like Juno being one of the main chains where people can deploy CosmWasm contracts. Um, Other chains are also implementing CosmWasm.
Yeah, Terra,
Yeah,
Osmosis.
Terra, Osmosis, Club, I think, is probably also going to do it at some point, or Keychain. Um, then we have Agoric that a lot of people are very excited about, and now Evmos. I don't know. I mean, my feeling is that this fragmentation, it could go either way. Like, I mean, the fragmentation could be good for the ecosystem because it creates a lot of different types of applications and use cases. But I think that alignment also helps accelerate development because everyone is kind of focused in on one thing. And my my thinking around this is, as the ecosystem gets bigger and lots of new people come into the ecosystem, is this bizarre approach that Cosmos has always uh, kind of stood by going to work in creating like a competitive ecosystem where people can actually, like, an ecosystem that can compete with, you know, the likes of Solana and, you know, Ethereum and some of the other big layer ones.
I think a lot of these chains will specialize in different use cases. Um, you have, of course, a base layer infrastructure like the Evmos, the Junos, etc. But you will also see like application specific chains that have VMs that are specifically targeting a use case like osmosis. Cosmos WASM environment is probably not going to support, say, I don't know, random governance smart contracts or whatever, like NFTs necessarily. That's going to be probably Stargaze, but it's on Osmosis is going to have Cosmos WASM environment for only DeFi. So it's kind of like, even though they have like the same application, underlying application, they're kind of like narrowing down on the use case according to what they're already implementing on their chain. That being said, I think there's there's also going to be alignment between all these different protocols through IBC. Even the ones that don't necessarily have the same runtime, like, or same VM, like Cosmos WASM and Evmos that implements the EVM. So once we implement the functionality for smart contracts on Evmos to call smart contracts on Juno or any Cosmos WASM chain, like the collaboration we're currently working with Stargaze for NFTs, is going to be huge, because then you'll have the same standard for calling smart contracts on both chains, and that's going to be creating a huge alignment where the chains now don't actually need to compete necessarily, but they can also access the benefits from the other counterparty chains that they're connected to.
So there will be, so it won't matter what the underlying runtime is. Accounts on the interchain are going to be able to control contracts regardless of what the runtime is what you're saying.
Yeah, they will be able, like, contracts on the EVM will be able to call contracts on Cosmos and vice versa. I think assets like CW20, which is the Cosmos representation of tokens, are going to be compatible with ERC20s on the EVM. And both of them are also going to be compatible with the Cosmos token format. Um, so like creating standardization and creating like interoperability components between all these different runtimes and EVMs is also going to help solve many use cases, and it's going to be able to provide more functionalities, like, and something that we haven't even talked about is like interchain farming. So farming on the interchain is something that I'm particularly very interested in, and it's a model that I call interchain workflows, where you set up a workflow for one contract to be called in one chain, which calls another contract on another chain, or interacts with osmosis or whatever. You create you get the LP pools, and then you're creating the same uh, hype that you had on Ethereum in 2020 with DeFi farming, but you're now expanding that to the interchain because of the interoperability, and that is going to be huge. That is going to be huge, and in order for us to support these use cases, we need to provide interoperability between like these different EVMs, different VMs. And this is something I like. Our team is personally really excited to work with, and happy to work with any other team. And that's why we don't see, like, for example, Juno or any other Cosmo Awesome chain as like competitors or anything. Like, if we are able to reach assets and reach contracts through IBC, it's going to create so many opportunities for all the end users.
Yeah, I mean, I fully am I'm fully on board with the idea that interoperability just creates more value everywhere, and which is why I'm so bullish on Cosmos and the Interchain and what IBC brings in terms of all these ecosystems being able to interoperate. And we haven't talked about like Polkadot, also like the ability for Polkadot assets to move in and out of the interchain. Yeah, I think like interoperability is the way that we're going.
Yeah, and Evmos will be a point of entry for all these Polkadot from us in the Polkadot ecosystem, and also from Kusama.
What happened in the days leading up to March 4th, and what happened afterwards? And I just want to kind of set the context here, and then maybe talk about the vulnerabilities that were uncovered, and then what's the relaunch plan? Because I think that's what people are really interested in, is like, where are we going from here?
Before mainnet launch, so we have finished all the components. We had finished all the claiming functionality. The dashboard was pretty much ready in terms of I think like only governance was missing, but that's why we also gave, like, that we said on the on chain, the claiming to start like one day after minute launch. So we had, and this is something that we unfortunately realized right after launching, was the ledger addresses were being incorrectly displayed on Kepler. So, like, if you generated a soft key, like a software key, you would get the right address. But if you had your, for example, your address that was generated through Ledger, and then you change the network to Evmos, you will be displaying the incorrect, or an address that is invalid more than incorrect. So the, as I mentioned before, like, we're not supporting the Cosmos keys in order to have all these Ethereum functionality tooling and like working properly, etc., like MetaMask. Because of this, the there was a huge risk in terms of like users transferring their claimable records into invalid addresses, so that all those funds will be stuck, and they won't be able to be claimed. And so we decided to delay the launch, added new functionality in order to check for these use cases and these vulnerabilities. There was another, and that was like the Kepler one. On the other side, we had the MetaMask issues where and the EVM functionality not working properly, because so in order to for you to convert the Cosmos tokens into ERC20 tokens, so like changing the format, the Cosmos component needs to listen to the events and from a contract in particular, and then convert this token format. And this functionality was disabled, but because it was disabled, it was also disabling by mistake the ERC20 functionality, which was erroring. So like any transaction that was going through the EVM then went to this post-processing logic, made the EVM transactions fail. And this was initially tested locally on the testnet and everything, but because the parameter was disabled, it was actually the parameter that was preventing this. We had planned an upgrade, scheduled upgrade for the following Monday, but during Friday and during the weekend, we got a notification from the core IVC team that there was a potential critical vulnerability. that you can read more about, and on the postmortem that we created on the security tab on GitHub, where we disclose the vulnerability. So we started working on it during the weekend, and we planned an emergency upgrade for the day before, for Sunday. And unfortunately, what happened there is that the upgrade procedure was successful, but the upgrade itself, so like the nodes that had to halt their the validators that had to halt their nodes, download the new version, and then restart the nodes. That process failed, and that process was meant to be automatic, and the automatic upgrade is a process that failed. And then soon afterwards, which is something that has already happened in the ecosystem, like the automatic procedures now working as expected. And then, but it's a super quick fix in the sense of you download the new version manually and then you restart the node because your node is already halted. So you just need to download the new version. Unfortunately, some validators were still running on the previous version, so that caused issues with consensus and blocks not being produced. And then after some time, a few validators were still offline, so we weren't able to produce new blocks. And then finally, some validators were by mistake double signed while trying to fix this consensus round because it was like at 66, so really close to producing a block. And a few validators double signed, unfortunately, during one of the voting rounds in the Tendermint consensus, and they were slashed, and that took the 17% of the voting power out. And yeah, then it was pretty much impossible to restart the chain without the required threshold.
So there was two things. So there was the issues with Kepler and Ledger integration, where users were sending funds to keys that aren't valid.
First part that I mentioned in the interview, that the most challenging thing is actually getting all these tools, which are not part of the core protocol, to work on to work with the EVM that they were not completely designed for, or with all this EVM functionality. Because the Ledger app that we're using, for example, is not the Cosmos Ledger app; it's the Ethereum Ledger app. Or like soon we'll be launching a new Evmos Ledger app that supports this. But
yeah, and I encountered this. Like I was trying to claim my airdrop, and I was using a ledger, and I was following these guides, and it wasn't quite clear what was happening. And then I don't know. I think I got the tokens, but then because the chain was restarted, essentially, like kind of like forgot about it. But so there was that, and then there was this other vulnerability that allowed attackers to, I think, kind of claim multiple airdrops.
Yeah, through an malicious IBC chain. And it was a really tricky vulnerability where you had to basically create a malicious chain, basically spin up a new chain with custom functionality, change the signing authorization mechanism. Once that was changed, you need to spin up the chain with validators. Then afterwards, you need to connect that via IVC by setting up a relayer and creating the handshake, and then sending an IVC transfer to Evmos in order to claim the tokens.
Yeah, and here basically you were spoofing. One would have to spoof the address from which the transaction came. I think. Okay, so I mean, this is all described in the postmortem, and I'll link to that in the show notes. The postmortem is like really detailed, and people should take a look at it if they want to learn more about what happened. And then there was this double signing thing, and I think that was the most interesting aspect of the postmortem. Because these validators were tombstoned, and I went and I looked at the Cosmos documentation to look up what that meant, and from what I read, it seemed like this is a proposed action? It's not actually. Is it implemented? Is this something that exists?
Double signing causes your validator to be jailed permanently. So you're kicked out from the validator set. You're not able to produce new blocks, and you're basically, yeah, putting a tombstone on the on the validator, because it's not going to be able to get out from the jailed state ever.
But what does that mean practically? Because I mean, like, couldn't I just spin up a new validator with new addresses and move the tokens over there? Like,
Yeah, you can do that, but then you won't have the voting power.
oh, right, okay. So all the delegates
You
would then
lose all
also
the delegation.
you lose all the delegations. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's a Byzantine action where you don't know if the validator is actually committing something malicious, and that's why it's designed to be tombstone, where you, like, traditionally would like leaving the upgrade procedure out, are where you're most likely to double sign because you're running two conflicting versions and signing one block and then another block, and then you're double signing at the same height or at the same round, um, which is, it's not malicious, but during the normal operation of the blockchain where you're producing block, if you're double signing a regular block, that could be something that's potentially malicious. But in this case, like, you were having validators. This was a case where the validators wanted to ensure that the consensus was reached by trying to. So the main problem here is that because a lot of the validators were offline, there were not new blocks being produced, and the peers were basically reset. So you were losing all these peers all the time. So in order for you to become online, you had to reset the peers, manually update the peer list, and be able to start sending messages with all the rest of the validators in order to produce this new block. And you had to do this manually, and sometimes the validators that were already offline were kicked out from the consensus round because they didn't have healthy peers, or some of these peers were removed because they were not producing blocks. And then what happened is, with this, like, trying to become online again during this process, that took so long, it took like 4 or 6 hours, being in the exact same state, caused some validators to just double sign by mistake while trying to become online again, because for a long time it was like 66% of the voting power online, so like just right below the threshold in order to produce a block. And actually a block was produced. The thing is, like, in the next block, some of the validators were offline again, and then you had to start this new process again.
Yeah, so these validators are tombstoned. Will they continue to be tombstoned once the chain relaunches? Because it, from my vantage points, it seems like if these validators, that this was a consequence of all the
Of the
confusion
upgrade.
and of the upgrade. Yeah, was there any evidence of malicious behavior or?
No, there's no evidence of malicious behavior, and what we're gonna do is restart the chain from the previous upgrade so that there is no evidence of uh, double signing on chain. So these validators can resume operations as normally.
What's the next steps, and what are the plans to relaunch the chain, and when is that going to happen?
Yeah. So today we're launching an internal testnet. Sorry, the public testnet with all the changes. This is going to be the beta version, and we're going to run that with a community of validators. And once that's done, we're going to ensure that the bugs are, well, the bugs will be fixed if this testnet goes successful. But then we also need to test that the restarting the chain is actually not breaking any anything else based on what I just said. The upgrade was not successful, and you basically need to restart with the previous state.
Okay. So is the plan to restart the chain from zero or from the block before the upgrade, which I think was like 58,700? Like you're not sure yet where.
It's gonna be 58,000.
Okay.
So like and this is what a lot of people have been complaining, that some users were able to claim their tokens while others not, and the ones that were able to claim their tokens were the ones that read the specification that we had publicly available, and were able to, like create a guide or whatnot, and but as opposed to other chains in the ecosystem, we're distributing the tokens epoch space, so like every day at the same time. So that effectively reduces the amount of allocation to like only 3 events. So like the chain was running for 4 days, but we started the claiming process like a day afterwards. So the only ones that were able to sort of like benefit were the ones that claimed during these 3 periods. Um, so that's where instead of like 58,700 blocks, where in every block you were distributing all these rewards, you only distribute them on 3 events. So the users were not necessarily, there were some users who were able to claim, yes, but there weren't many events. There weren't many tokens that were distributed because of this. Was only 3 events instead of like more days or more events or like block than a per block reward.
Yeah, and I heard concerns also about validators who had sold some of the tokens over the counter. So those transactions, by starting at 58,700, those transactions are also preserved and aren't reverted.
Yeah, so restarting the chain will preserve. Restarting the chain from the latest height will preserve the entire state of the blockchain.
Yeah, what is the impact on the Rektdrop here, if any? Are users going to get more tokens because they've had to go through this, or are you just keeping the Rektdrop sort of like tokenomics as is?
So this is something that we already increased the airdrop allocation initially, like before this happened, because of the previous delays. But yeah, we're gonna give more time for users to claim their full amount before the decay period starts, and then we're probably gonna be we're gonna give more time, but we're not considering at the moment giving anything on exchange for this, but this is something we haven't put into consideration, and then we are gonna be the ones providing, as I mentioned, this product for you to get a next spreadsheet and an airdrop tokens to different users, and probably one category would also be so like users who weren't able to claim during the Rektdrop.
And what's the lesson here? Like, what have you learned from this, or what's the team learned? And I think there's also like a broader lesson for the blockchain ecosystem as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah. So the main lesson that we learned is we had focused our testing and QA processes mostly on chain, and not actually with all the products or all the tools that our users will interact with, like Kepler, MetaMask, etc. So also focusing on like an end-to-end interaction with all these tools is something that we've learned that is really important as part of like deploying new functionality, of course, because some tools might work and some tools might not, or some might be displaying incorrect information with like for example what happened with Kepler. So ensuring that everything works end to end is something that we're also going to spend more time on. And we've also like we're also creating like readiness checklists, ensuring that all this functionality is tested, well specified, discovering like potential attack vectors, not only from internally to our chain, but also that affect IBC, etc.
And do you think there's a broader lesson here to be learned from this episode? And I can't help but, they're totally different episodes, but there's been like two kind of crises in the Cosmos ecosystem over the last month. There's been the whole like Juno whale governance proposal, and then what's happened with Evmos. Um, what are the kind of takeaways here for the ecosystem, and how can we hope to maybe do better in the future, or like avoid these sorts of things in the future, or yeah.
Yeah. So big part of our push in launching this functionality is ensuring that the Cosmos ecosystem is ready to support Ethereum, and the Ethereum ecosystem is ready to support Cosmos. And we're working a lot in to ensure that is going to happen through Evmos. And supporting all the Cosmos tool and the Ethereum tooling is really important. The other thing is creating more guides and more documentation in order to ensure that testing functionality is as expected, upgrade procedures work as expected, so that we're going to be the only ones, we're going to be the last ones to encounter these sort of issues, so that other teams can also learn from our mistakes. Also, other teams can learn from our practices in terms of like testing, QA. I'm really happy to share with that those guides and those testing practices that we're introducing to the rest of the community. I've already been working with the IVC team to ensure that they enable more QA processes, like behavior tests against a specification, etc.
Yeah, I think like the testing and auditing aspect remains the biggest challenge, I think, in blockchains as we increase composability and interoperability, and it's going to get more and more complex, and there's going to be more things to look at in terms of ensuring that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And but yeah, hopefully with it's like it's like I look at it sort of similar to the airline industry, or like the aviation industry, and how you know it's unfortunate, but like we've learned so much from all the incidents and crashes that happened in the last like 70 years or whatever, and now like plane crashes are fairly rare. When they happen, it's horrible, but they're reasonably rare compared to like what it was like in the 60s and 70s, where your risk of crashing on an airplane was like not incredibly high, but I think was much higher than what it is today. And I think we'll go through the same sorts of things in crypto. And there's like that Rekt leaderboard is like you can kind of compare it to to all the airplane crashes that happened in the last 50 years.
Yeah, the main thing is like Cosmos is hard, and then on top of that we have the EVM, and on top of that we also have like IBC, which adds one layer and then another layer of potential vulnerabilities, which is harder to audit, harder to test, and harder to. But we're implementing all these processes and setting all these things in place so that we ensure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and the good thing is, I mean, also this happened at the launch of the chain. Like no funds were lost. Essentially, there's been no real economic loss from this, and so I think you guys will recover. You're definitely doing the right thing about being transparent, and and I'm still super excited and bullish about Evmos. So like really looking forward to you guys launching. And
Awesome.
yeah. So when is the relaunch? Do we have a date?
We don't have a date because we're going to be working with the validators and to ensure that the transition is smooth. I'm also going to ask for their availability because we don't want to post any dates without them knowing.
That's a big doodle. That's a big Calendly to have like all the validators available.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to looking forward to seeing where this goes. Like, I think it's going to be such a big push in the blockchain space generally, and in bringing together like the EVM ecosystem and the Ethereum ecosystem and the Cosmos ecosystem. And I can't wait to see what that brings in terms of usage and like new applications and just like growth. And it's going to be massive. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Sebastian.